Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So today we're going to continue the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project. We have a fun video for you guys today because you've been asking to take a closer look at some of the cores that exist but are not yet finished. So I figured we'd kick off this little mini series with the Atari Jaguar. It's definitely not the best console of its generation. It's definitely not the worst. There is some fun to be had, so we're going to check it out. And big thanks to today's video sponsor, MiSTer Add-ons. I use all his equipment for all of these videos, and I have been for about the last 5 years. And it's wild to think that I've actually been doing this series for almost 5 years at this point in time. But honestly, there is an Atari Jaguar Core. It is going to require some dual RAM action on your behalf, and it can play some games. This is just a core that has seen some active development but has never been finished, and you'll see here the video in the middle is definitely not centered. I'm showing it to you as it looks, and then I will very shortly fix it in post-processing. But what is here on the Atari Jaguar Core is quite promising. It could definitely be finished up and just basically go out there as another playable core for MiSTer FPGA. It just seems like no one's actually found the interest or time to finish something like this up. And just so you know before you comment down below, this is no way, shape, or form a dig at the core developers. I understand not every project ends up getting finished like the Sega Saturn or Nintendo 64 cores do. Not every single time does somebody sit down and do something from point A all the way to Z. But you can get some games playing on the Atari Jaguar today. And honestly, I was surprised at how many played. Something like NBA Jam here is functioning. Of course, there are a few graphical glitches, and the sound is nothing to write home about. I'm not going to give you a sound sample of this one, but you can play a game, and of course, you can pick John Stockton. And if you're not aware, kids on playgrounds today, when they shoot threes, they yell Stockton before they shoot. That way they know they're going to get that three-point swish. All Stockton jokes aside, NBA Jam on the Atari Jaguar is a very good version, and it would be great to have something like this finished up on MiSTer FPGA. Just somebody needs to come along, take a look at what exists, and decide whether or not they can finish it from that code, or maybe they might want to start with a complete rewrite, because that does happen as well. Some people will take the concept of and then basically just start from scratch again. But clearly it proves that the Atari Jaguar is possible on MiSTer FPGA, because all of the footage you're seeing in this video is from the current Atari Jaguar Core, and it has not been updated in a very long time, so whatever might be sitting on your system is definitely what's being used here. And the Atari Jaguar is one of those consoles, not everybody loves it. There is a diehard fan base out there for it, and while it doesn't have the biggest library nor the best games, NBA Jam, stuff like Alien vs Predator, Rayman are all very good times. Now honestly, this is not from the Atari Jaguar Core, this is from Big PMU, just to show you what I would love to play on the core. AVP is a great game, and I 100% think it is worth owning a Jaguar for. But now moving over to Cannon Fodder here, this is a game that basically works perfectly on the core. Depending on what calls that they're using in a game to the Jaguar's hardware, you may see better or worse results when you actually try to use the core. But something like Cannon Fodder here, outside of the screen not being centered, I have again fixed this in post. This is the type of game that you can just sit down and play on the current core. All of the graphics are drawing correctly as far as my memory serves. All of the sound is relatively decent. The control is there. This just feels like playing an Atari Jaguar with an RGB cable coming out of the back of it. And I always thought it was funny that Atari couldn't even give you a port, they just gave you an edge connector to get RGB out, which is maybe the biggest cost-saving cheap move I've ever seen in console development. It does work, it is just strange. But as you can see here as the footage goes by, this is one of those games where I would just say start playing it on the core today. And the best part is Cannon Fodder is one of the Jaguar's better games, so it's always fun if one game is going to work basically perfectly for it to be one of the better titles. And there's definitely some more cores on MiSTer that have seen development but haven't been finished, and I will be talking about those in videos, but if you have any recommendations, leave them down below, because for every 10 MiSTer cores we get completed and are perfection, there's usually one core out there that is basically just halted mid-development, where you can get something off of the core, but it is not going to be complete. And the sound, like I said, is a mixed bag across the core. Definitely keep your volume low and only turn it up when you know it's working, but the sound in Cannon Fodder, as far as I can tell, sounds like it should, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds. I'll be back with more Jaguar games that you can play on MiSTer. I mean, it's not a whole lot of audio, but it does sound clear here, and even the intro screens here, all of the different missions, they do just work across the core, so this is pretty impressive stuff. It does show that Atari Jaguar can work on MiSTer FPGA. Somebody just needs to actually dedicate the time to finishing this core or taking up the work, kind of seeing what can be saved, and then rewriting other portions of it to get it more compatible. But let's move into the track sequence here of another game. If you can't tell already, you'll know very shortly. This is Rayman. This is as far as it gets. It's going to show some corruption, then it's going to freeze to a black screen. Again, the footage you're seeing right here, some big PMU, not the Atari Jaguar Core, but getting something like Rayman on MiSTer FPGA in the Jaguar version, which is one of the best, would be an awesome time. But for every Rayman, a game that doesn't work, you get something like Flashback, a game that does work. This is definitely a love it or hate it sort of experience. I love Flashback as well as the rest of the games in this kind of genre. Other people don't, but this is another one that just seems to be 100% working on the core, at least for the footage I've seen. And this one does have music in the intro, which sounds perfect on the core, so listen just 30 seconds and I'll be right back. I mean, that's discernible intro music on Flashback. It might sound a little bit muffled, but again, the Atari Jaguar cartridges were very small compared to pretty much every other storage medium used in consoles this generation. Obviously, something like the Jaguar was trying to compete against 3DO and PlayStation 1, and obviously those systems had a lot bigger storage medium on compact disc, but even then, the Atari Jaguar cartridges were small even for their generation, honestly, so sometimes you do get audio samples that have just been a little bit too stepped on and a little bit too compressed. But seeing Flashback running here in the Atari Jaguar Core does show a lot of promise. Now, it's possible that this game freezes 10 minutes after the footage stops, 20 minutes after the footage stops, but it's possible that you could just finish this game in its entirety. Can't test everything that far. It would take me weeks to complete one video, but honestly, again, just seeing this work shows that it is another console we could have on MiSTer, and this has been pending for some years now. You guys have been asking me to talk about it for the longest time. Sorry it took so long to get around to it. There's just been so many new cores and so many core updates. I always had this on a list and never actually got around to it until Andy D helped me get the episode out, so again, big thanks to him. But again, Flashback is a lot of fun, and leave me a comment down below and tell me if you played this one, because I feel like either people have played it and loved it, or people have played it and absolutely not clicked with it whatsoever. It's definitely an acquired taste. It is a slower action puzzle platformer that definitely requires a lot of backtracking and a lot of thought to make sure you can get through the game, but I actually really enjoy that. Once you get good at it, it doesn't take very long at all to see the ending, but it is a fun game worth your time, and at least today on the current Atari Jaguar Core, you're going to be able to play it at least through the intro area. Who knows what happens after that. And before anyone asks, of course, Tempest 2000 was tested. This is obviously one of the Jaguar's most popular games, and you can almost get the title into the game. You'll see there it froze. We'll go back to the title screen and try it one more time. This is something that seems like it wants to boot, but you can't actually get in game. And don't forget, not every single game uses every single function of the Atari Jaguar hardware the same way. When the Nintendo 64 core was in development, you'd have some games that would work perfectly and others that would freeze or have bugs. That's just because it was asking for something different from the hardware, and that might not be working here. But let's move over to Raiden. This is a fun shmup. It's not my favorite, but a lot of people have a lot of love for this game. Now on the core, it can have a few visual glitches here and there, and the audio is nothing to write home about. You're not going to get a sound sample because it definitely has a lot of distortion, but as far as the actual gameplay is concerned, again, it shows an Atari Jaguar Core functioning on MiSTer FPGA on the DE10 Nano board, and it seems to be relatively stable. This is something that's definitely not pushing the hardware to its limits, because a lot of times with the Motorola 68000 on board in the Jaguar, developers would utilize that and basically almost ignore the custom ASICs on board that Atari developed to basically make the Jaguar the Jaguar. The 68000 was supposed to just be a helper chip, but it didn't have to be, and because something like Raiden, the developers are probably so comfortable with that chip, they can pivot it over to using just that 68000. So honestly, it might be a situation where some of the games games that are working aren't even touching Tom and Jerry, the two custom chips inside of the Jaguar. And those chips definitely had a lot of design bugs in the SDK and documentation. They basically gave you directions on how to avoid hitting some of the hardware issues that were laid up in silicon. Seems like the Atari Jaguar was maybe a little bit rushed and a few bugs did come in with the hardware, but again, I'm not a hardware designer. I'm sure it's incredibly hard and you can't really fault someone for trying to stand up a brand new console on a budget and not having a few bugs in the silicon. But if you want to play Raiden today on the current core, you can, at least through level 1. Didn't see the end of the game, but it never froze, so it does seem like something that could be possible. And that's the main takeaway of a video like this. Possibilities. There's so many things that can run on MiSTer FPGA, and there's so many things that are basically 50-60% of the way there that just aren't seeing active development. So if somebody did come along and decide to pick this work up, there is a foundational base to continue Atari Jaguar development on the console. And of course, there's always going to be some fan demos on hardware as well. We can test a few here, and you're going to see that they do boot up and do display graphics on screen. It's actually surprising just how much the Atari Jaguar Core can do. I didn't really ever look at this thing because I didn't think there would be enough material to get a video out of. I assumed everything would crash in the first 15-20 seconds outside of cannon fodder, and I really would just be talking over a black screen. But honestly, what you're seeing here seems like 60-65% of a full Atari Jaguar running on MiSTer FPGA, and that means you can get a lot more out of it. And you'll see here some of the most famous demos have been compiled and are running for the Jaguar, but do not run this with the volume on. It sounds absolutely wild, and it is not a good wild, it's a ears bleed wild. But definitely check the Atari Jaguar Core out. It's not something that you're going to be able to play every single game on, but it is something that shows that the Jaguar is obviously possible for MiSTer FPGA, and if somebody takes the time to finish development, you could have another console of the generation on the system. That just leaves PCFX and the 3DO, and of course the CDI, because I know some people love it, as other consoles from that generation to complete the entire set. But short of that, if you want to see more videos like this, leave me a comment down below. Otherwise, we will just basically take a look at the Jaguar the next time if it ever sees an update. And I've got a sneaking suspicion that Jaguar will probably be updated in the next year or so. I think someone's going to come along and take a look at it. But if you want to play something like Iron Soldier, you can't do that. Go over to Big PMU. Short of that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.